This video is sponsored by Squarespace.
Hello, I'm Jeff.
Hello, I'm Ross.
And I'm Patrick.
And we are joined from Steamforge, yet again, by Matt. Hello.
Thanks for having me back.
But you're here wearing a slightly different hat.
That's true.
From the last conversation. What are you going to tell us about?
So we are going to talk about the P3 paint range and some of the work I've been doing for the last 6 months or so.
Wow. So this is coming as part of your deal that you've done with Privateer Press.
Yes.
So this is coming from there. Because I do remember back in the day that whenever I seen the Privateer Press range on the shelf in a shop that we previously talked about, P3 was nestled in right beside it. So I always got that feeling that it was designed that they went hand in hand. And so then your plan is to put that relationship back together again then, really?
Yes, I think historically P3 paint has always been recognised by painters for some really amazing properties, and it's a much loved paint range that's just not been around for the last year or so. So one of the first things that we want to do is get it back so people can access it, and we can talk at length about what P3 paint does and what it's going to do going forward. And why it should be, something that people look at to add to their painting arsenal, for want of a better expression. But yeah, it's sad that there's so many of these wonderful colours that simply aren't available, and it's making them available. That's the primary mission.
Well, it always has a good pedigree, and because even now I'll watch certain YouTube videos when it comes to painting, and someone will have. They'll pick one of them up and you can almost hear like a choir. Yeah. And there'll be a beam of holy light behind it. When they pick it up, it's like,
like Richard Gray picking up his Morrow White.
These paints that are like, I've got one of them that I have in my ranges. I've got a bottle of Games Workshop Chestnut ink.
Oh, right. Okay.
That's slowly disappearing. And I'm just like...
Oh, so interestingly, at that time, that was the paint base that P3 was based on.
Oh, right.
Is it really?
Yeah.
So as I understand, so P3, which I was going to ask what it means, but P3 means Privateer Press Paints, doesn't it? Yeah. Okay. So
well, that's what I assume it does.
Let's say it does. So that's what it means, everyone.
Yeah, we got to come up with a new acronym now because
P4.
I mean P4, SFGP1. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'll stick with P3 just so people can recognise it. We'll come up with some. We'll retrofit, like the best acronyms, retrofit one to make sense.
We'll do that.
Yeah.
So P3 obviously came out with as the paint line for Privateer Press Games.
Yep.
So what was it? Because it's no longer available at the moment.
Yep.
It sort of disappeared. The stock has dwindled. There's maybe a few on some hobby store shelves, but other than that, gone. You're looking to bring it back.
Yep.
So where did it? Do you know where it started in the first place?
Yeah. So, and again, this might be an incomplete kind of history, but my understanding is that Mike McVeigh was heavily involved in
that's a good start to a sentence.
That's a great start. So he obviously came from like the heavy metal kind of Citadel background, wanted to bring that knowledge and experience to the paint range, and therefore work closely with the manufacturer on getting certain properties into the paint so it behaved in the way that he wanted to for that sort of painting style that they adopted in the studio. And then once they got that, it was then developing the colour range to suit and support the range of War Machine and Hordes, which is more on the realistic end of the scale, rather than a lot of modern paint ranges now are super saturated, super poppy, really bright colours. The P3 paint range tends to be more kind of realistic and grounded.
Yeah,
it's a bit more AK.
Yeah. So no bright fluorescent tones or anything like that, and very much more like you're not going to get neon green. You'll get more of a like grass-based green kind of thing.
Because I think one of the things to bear in mind with P3 paint, is the formula is probably about 20 years old. So paint technology has moved on like a long way. Pigment technology has moved on a long way. So you look at like a colour like necrotite green, which is like a really bright, vibrant green. Back in the day, like all yellow-based paints, the coverage wasn't great. You had to work really hard to kind of get any kind of colour coming through. So they tended to feature less heavily in the range overall because they just weren't the strongest colours. Whereas you look at the browns and the darker colours, they were a lot easier to
Yeah.
kind of put, get a decent layer down. So one of the things that we've been doing is looking to take advantage of a lot of the advances in paint technology, so we can get that coverage up, get the saturation up, and still maintain the same behavior that the paint had before.
Right. Okay. So then they're not coming back as was sort of thing,
No,
or-
and this is one of the most terrifying things about my existence for the last sort of, as long as I can think back, like the last 3 to 6 months has been like living in abject terror of getting this wrong. Is there's such a fondness, and I worry about the strength of nostalgia, but when you dig below that surface, and I've been painting a lot with the old P3 paints this year, and it reminded me how much I enjoy the behaviours that P3 paints have, and essentially, I don't think there's a better paint on the market or available at wet blending, or anything where you're involved in blending while the paint's still wet. So if you're into two-brush blending or feather blending, split blending, whatever you want to call it, or just straight out wet blending, P3 paints just behave the most reliably and the easiest to kind of get that style working. It does mean, like all paints, there is no one size fits all. So
No.
it's brilliant at that. It just means it's not going to be as good as other things. And I think, from my perspective, looking to bring a paint into a, dare I say, a saturated market,
very good.
I think you've got to have a really clear picture of why you're doing it, because you
Yeah.
can't just bring a paint range out
Yeah.
and go,
No, not nowadays.
Just
you
that-
can't.
yeah.
That was
No.
definitely going to be something that I was going to ask, but it's great that it's come up naturally, and I think some of our patrons have said it too. Like, I don't think you can just bring out an okay range of paints now.
Yeah.
Like, because there's another company that do
You've got to
that.
have something,
that
haven't you?
Yeah.
Somebody already has done and people own. So Squarespace has very kindly sponsored another video with us, and I'm going to show you how easy it is to build a website in about 15 minutes. Firstly, I'm getting started with Squarespace Blueprint. I'm typing in some information and it takes me through their new guided design system. You can choose from professionally curated layouts and styling options to build a unique online presence from the ground up, tailored to your brand or business and optimized for every device. So this will work great on a tablet, a mobile, a desktop, any screen. It's going to look amazing. Easily launch your website and get discovered fast with integrated, optimized SEO tools, so you show up more often to more people and grow the way you want. If you're looking to sell anything, you can make your checkout seamless with simple and powerful payment tools. You can accept credit cards, PayPal and Apple Pay, and in eligible countries offer customers the options to buy now but pay later with Afterpay and ClearPay. As you can see, and I'm sure you'll agree, I've just created the best website in the world, which is 100% factual. But if you don't want to go down the blueprint way, you can choose from many of the award-winning templates that Squarespace offer. You can get started with a professionally designed Squarespace website template with options for every use and category. Then customize your look, update content, and add features to fit your needs. Transform any template into your own and stand out online on every device. So if you go to squarespace.com for your free trial, have a play, and then when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/the painting phase to get 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
so the original P3, there was colours that people often refer to. So Morrow White, Menoth White Highlight, Coal Black, to name but a few, Sanguine Base. These are colours that people just absolutely love. But I think what they love, beyond just the tone of and the colour of it, is actually how it behaves. So the first thing that we needed to do was understand, how does the paint range behave? Where do we need to normalise it? Because I think one of the things that take the Fanatics paint range right now. It's a wonderful example of how every single paint, regardless of colour, behaves pretty similarly. So
Yeah.
it will dry in a relatively same time. It will behave. It'll come off the brush in the same sort of feel. We will, will go onto the model in the same sort of way, and it is entirely consistent. So when you're learning how to paint with a paint, it's much easier to learn with a paint if they all behave the same.
Yeah.
I pick on them because they're big enough and ugly enough. Look at Games Workshop contrast paints as another example of how not to do it.
Yeah.
Some of them, beautiful, straight out of the pot, effortless. Others, either not strong enough, they're a bit weak, they don't quite work, or others are so heavily pigmented you need to dilute them about 10 times over.
Happened to you, didn't it?
This is something that I've been going through recently, and I think I've talked about a bit as well, is, I've been sort of, I don't know, I've been airbrushing quite a lot recently, so I haven't really been doing like tons with contrasts, and then now I'm like going into other projects, and I'm like, oh, contrast paint. I remember how they work, straight out of the pot, and then being like, oh no, wait.
That's
If it's got like a chalky bit in it, it means it covers quite well, but then the new ones, they don't have the chalk in, but they still cover really well, and that's like a wash, and that doesn't do any, like, it's a very inconsistent range.
Yeah. And I think it's okay when you've learnt it, right? But for someone who's new to that range, that's a barrier for entry that they need to overcome. And during the testing, like, just anecdotally, I got a whole brand new set of samples, right? So I'd given a load of feedback and a few tweaks that I wanted to make, and they gave me a sample set back. I picked out one paint pot, and I just started painting with it, and it was awful. It was like, the color was splitting on my brush. It was coming off in almost like, it was almost like tartan paint coming down. It was just weird. It was split into blue and green dyes. Yeah.
Like Viagra was found by accident.
Oh God. And I was like, okay, maybe it's just me. Maybe it's a bit warm. Maybe it's like, so I went again and I went again and again. And I was banging my head against the wall with this paint. And I was like, and I got really depressed, and I was like pinging Rich, and I was like, I don't know what we're going to do. It's totally screwed. I don't know how am I going to turn this ship around? And he talked me down from the ledge. I went to sort of start testing the rest of the range, and then it turned out that 95% of the rest of the range was absolutely bob on. And now once I tested all of them, the worst paint in the entire range was the first paint pot that I picked up randomly. Now, you think about it, that was my first experience.
Yeah.
Right, and it was a good blue, a strong blue color. It's not an uncommon color for people to pick up.
Yeah.
That could have just turned you off the entire range. So really important that the quality and the behavior of the paint across the range was consistent, and P3 wasn't, because the paint technology itself just didn't support it. But good news is modern paint bases and formulas can now sustain a much heavier pigment load. So one of the things we needed to do was pump the pigments in those paints that needed it, and keep the ones that are already saturated enough at a right level. And now suddenly all of the paints started behaving in a similar fashion. And at that point, we could then start fine-tuning how the paint actually felt and behaved and reacted. And once we go through that, and I can chat about that in a little bit more detail, because there's some interesting bits there. But we're in that final stage now, where now we've got the paint behaving exactly how we want. It's absolutely fine-tuning the colours to be precisely the colours that we want them to be.
Is it the same manufacturer?
It is the same manufacturer, yeah. It's... I don't know how. I think it's a heavily guarded secret that isn't terribly secret, but they are keen for their paint to speak for themselves, and not for us to talk about them directly.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
So are you say, like, trying to get the colours the way you want them? So I'm assuming with the property changes there are going to be some tweaks to the colours, but are you trying to, I mean, when it goes into choosing a palette then, this isn't about, let's bring those colours back, because if I'm right, you can pretty much mix most of the colours you want. What is it about the chosen palette that you're aiming to select? If that,
it's a good question. So I'm really lucky, because I get to stand on the shoulder of giants. So there's 120, 130 paints. About 20 or 30 of them never got released. But were fully developed by the studio team at the Privateer Press over the years. So there's way more talented artists than me who have already put in an awful lot of time and effort into that kind of core range. So for me, a lot of the really hard work was already done. So what I was able to do is, perhaps with the benefit of a fresh set of eyes, is sort of say, well, these are the colours that I can't do without from other ranges. Is that something that we should bring in? So a good example is, an ice yellow. It's a ubiquitous highlight colour. And it's certainly something the P3 range didn't have. It will have an ice yellow now going forward, because it's so useful to kind of, act as a highlight. So that's a good example of how we're doing it. And then beyond that, there will be some degree of tailoring to, like, the factions that we are releasing, and making sure we've kind of got good coverage in that regard. So if you're buying a certain faction, people do like to know what the kind of like the stock color scheme is. But much like you see with a Space Marine chapter,
Yeah.
there's 1,000 different ways of painting a Space Marine.
Yeah.
So we don't necessarily want to lean too heavily into sort of saying every Khador army needs to be red and black. You
Yeah.
know, you get a lot of mileage out of all kinds of colour, you know, green, whites, etc., etc. for
Yeah,
paint.
yeah. Can you talk about like how you're putting them together? Like, are we talking like a triad system, which is a common word that's going round, or is it more? Because you said 120 paints. Like, are you looking to release 120 paints?
So right as of now, yes, but that's subject to kind of like final shaking down. What we will almost certainly do is there'll be an important distinction between what we release on crowdfunding and what we release to retail.
Right. Okay.
So we are big fans of making sure that when we sell a product to our retail friends and partners, that we're selling them something we know is going to turn quite nicely in their shops. So we're looking to do a curated range for retail release of the high turn items.
Yeah.
And then some of those more esoteric kind of specific colors, we'll probably look, you know, if we do it on Kickstarter or a crowdfunding platform, those will be like a Kickstarter thing.
Yeah.
And then we'll also be able to sell those direct as well. So we don't want our retail friends to kind of, unless they want to, of course, but we don't want to sort of make them feel they need to carry the stock of 6 pots of pink, you know, that you're going to sell 2 a year kind of thing.
So is the idea like you'll get your, because it's going to go hand in hand with War Machine as well.
Yeah.
So is the idea like you were talking on the previous show, right? We'll have a one rack, a 2 rack. So on that 1 rack, you'll have these faction boxes and these paint boxes, for example. Is that kind of
kind of in principle? I don't think that we want to put them into specific faction boxes.
Okay.
So what my current thinking is, and again, I need to sort of socialise this, you know, with the commercial team and the marketing team, just to make sure that everyone
to be confirmed. And
so this is all to be confirmed. But I feel like there's room for a starter set style box that has a lot of like the really core colours in it, and then everything else can be like one-offs, and you just buy the singles for the paints that you want.
Yeah.
For the Kickstarter, there will almost certainly be like an all-in kind of get everything. Whether we do that as a retail SKU or not is up for grabs. So that's largely down to the marketing team and the brand team and the commercial team to make sure that we're putting together products that our distribution friends and partners actually want to carry.
Would you be tempted to have the blend in the way that Games Workshop do between War Machine and the paint of like a character figure in a box with paint? Or
certainly something we thought about. You know, I think Army Painter do brilliantly with that, and it's a really nice way to get people into the hobby as well. It acts as that kind of signpost to maybe, I don't know, mum and dad or grandma and granddad going in and like, oh well, that's kind of a cool Christmas gift or a birthday present,
everything in the box,
because it's everything, including the paintbrush. So.
Yeah.
And we get a lot of traction and a lot of excitement. We do paint and takes at shows all over the world. So. And we do that generally in conjunction with Army Painter, so we're really super friendly with those guys. So yeah, we'll see an awful lot of love for, you know, minis that people can just sit down and grab and paint. So that's probably an angle that we're going to go down as well. Again, standing on the shoulder of giants, someone's already had this brilliant idea. We think it's great. We're going to do the same thing.
Absolutely right.
Yeah.
Well, it's almost a no-brainer to do it.
I think so. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So with the were you going to?
No, you go.
No? Cool. So when you said earlier, like the characteristics of P3 great for like your wet blending and that kind of thing, getting into, I guess, you know, some specifics. Why is that? What is it about the paint that makes it so great for blending?
So I think there's a couple of things that tie into that. So one is consistency. Yeah. And P3 is a creamy consistency. Now there are other creamy paints on the market, but then it comes onto brush feel. So it's how it feels as it coming off the brush. So if you take a P3 paint, which has a creamy consistency, and say like a Fanatic paint that also has a creamy consistency, or Pro Acryl, they will feel different coming off the brush. All three of them will feel different. So one of them is quite kind of heavy and quite sticky. Like the Fanatic paint is quite sticky, which is great because you get great coverage, you get great brush application, you don't have to overwork the surface, but it does mean the sacrifice for that is then workability.
Yeah, you've got to be wet edge, wet edge, wet edge, wet edge.
Yeah,
know. Yeah.
So you look at Pro Acryl, again, Pro Acryl, another paint that's well known for its coverage.
Yeah.
Super matte finish, but with matte finish becomes that shorter working time and that window, because essentially the minute you put paint onto a surface, the pigment is trying to adhere to the surface. Right, so is how long does it take for the pigment to adhere to the surface is essentially your working time. So with P3, you have the same creamy consistency. You apply it. For me, it feels nice coming off the brush. It's a little bit Goldilocks. It's kind of neither this nor that. It's nicely in the middle. But as it comes on, because of the tweaks that we've made to the, so we put a new formula together. And it was great. It did all the heavy pigment load, the saturation, like the coverage was there, but the drying window just suddenly went chunk down to 0, and now it lost its workability. So then we had to go back, start building in the workability, and it's like a game of whack-a-mole. So you tweak something, 2 things pop up, you push them down, another thing pops up, and it's just finding that balance. So the P3 paint that we've got behaves in an almost identical fashion to the old P3 paint in terms of you put it on, you have a really nice working window, the paint is grippy enough for you to do edge highlights, you can use it undiluted out of the pot, so you've got like this nice thick paint when you want those kind of applications like edge highlighting and things like that. But then if you want to go into layering, it can take a little bit of water to just loosen it up. That's your base coating. And then if you want to go into real translucent layers, you can then knock it down again and again and again. And I've taken it all the way down to paint water for the thinnest of glazes. So the pigment holds up at all stages of dilution. Yeah. So it really lends itself to the modern painting styles, which is, if you're looking at high-end painting, it's stipple glazing is like the real high-end painting style. So it can do that. But I think the best painting style for 80% of the people out there is going to be layering. So translucency is really important. Workability is really important for layering. So you can go in, layer it on. Depend on the amount of coverage. I'm someone who likes to build opacity through layers rather than straight out the gate. So if I'm painting a cloth, I will kind of put my first layer on, and I like building a lot of texture in. So I'll paint a bit of a scratchy layer, let it dry, build another scratchy layer, but I'm just making that I'm overlapping on the bits where I want the highlights to be. They become
sketching it in, kind of.
Yeah, you end up sketching it in.
Sort of style,
And then you can finish off with like a nice glaze. A glaze just harmonizes it over the top, and you end up in a fraction of the time something that looks pretty decent.
So you've talked about consistency, but as I still understand it, am I right that you cannot have a fully consistent range? Because things like your warm colours, your oranges, your yellows, your bright reds are going to be generally more poorer coverage due to the pigment that's in them versus your blues, for example, your pure blues. Like, there's still going to be a bit of balance there.
No, you're exactly right.
Right, okay.
Yeah, no, so the only way you could do that is if every colour was the same.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So because pigments do behave differently, so what we've needed to do is look at the base that we're using. So essentially every paint is a mixture of a base, a binder, and a pigment. And then there's a few other doodads that you put in, like kind of flow aid and drying time extender and stuff like that. But the different base is used for different types of pigments. So for example, in the new P3 formula, the lighter colors we've put in that uses a white base, so that gives you the better coverage, and is also able to kind of carry like a heavier pigment load of the lighter pigments. Whereas the darker pigments, which are heavier, don't need that, so they're on a clear base because they already have all the help that they need. And actually, what you don't want to do is put a white base in with your dark, because that's how you pasteurize things and you lose a lot of the saturation.
They did that recently. Squidmar did a video on it with Andy Wardle from Cult of Paint. So Citadel's colours have changed and they've put more white in so that the coverage is better. It makes sense. It's easier, but they've lost vibrancy.
I feel like a trend in the miniature paint industry at the minute is going for coverage. Is it for new painters? I can imagine that's incredibly useful. I.e. just done. Like, you can get things on the table quicker.
Well, it is, because I think, and this is something I don't think people talk about a lot, which is, and we've all been online and seen people going, give me some feedback on this mini, and they put something up, and the first thing someone says, thin your paint.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? It's the
yeah,
most common
yeah.
bit of feedback.
Yeah.
But actually, what they're not explaining to that person, because that person's like, okay, well, I thin my paint, thin it right down, and it still looks like this. What's going on? I can't thin it anymore. It's just, what's down the brush. Well, what generally, when you look at a miniature where someone's feedback is thin your paint, is this because they can see visible brush strokes
Yeah.
in the surface of the paint.
Yeah.
That only happens when you overwork your paint.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
if you paint on and leave it, the paint is designed to settle. It's a liquid. It finds its own level, and
Yeah.
the pigment starts to drop, right? How many times have you painted a surface, you've been impatient, you've gone in with the next one, and you've peeled a little bit off?
Oh,
Every
100
time,
Right?
yeah.
We all do it,
Yeah.
So essentially, what for a new player and experienced painters, because we still do it, that's what's happening is that the texture into the paint is coming because you're overworking it. Generally, you overwork it because the coverage isn't great.
Yeah.
Therefore, most people are saying, right, if you increase the coverage, new painters and intermediate painters won't need to overwork the paint so much. You get better results. So
Yeah.
and it's true.
Yeah.
You generally will get better results with it. Now, there is a sacrifice, as with everything. You're going to lose for coverage. You get more titanium white into the mix. More titanium white in, the more desaturated the color
Yeah.
becomes. So it's finding the balance, and I think it's determining where you want your paint to exist in the market, and messaging that to painters so they can make an educated choice.
Yeah.
So another good example is one thing that P3 has always been is a slightly satin finish. So it's not full satin, but it's 2 or 3 notches up from the current baseline, started by Scale 75 and then Pro Acryl most recently. Is the flattest matte that you've ever seen in your life.
Yeah.
And it's great, and we all feel like master painters when we use it for the first time. You go, oh well, because as it flattens down, it's almost like it blends as it dries. You're like,
yeah.
oh, how smart am I? But then you realise, oh, actually, I can't get enough value shift now because as it dries, it's matting out and it's just sort of blending in. So I now need to go in again. Oh, it's drying, it's blacking, and it ends up being quite, in terms of a value, quite consistent. But that's also part of the property of when a paint dries matte, it automatically desaturates just because of the way the matte surface reflects the light.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Sort of holds it, doesn't it, on the texture kind of thing, so it looks lighter because of
So basically, a matte surface is. Stop me if you already know this or I'm being too technical.
No,
but,
go for it.
so a matte surface is essentially very, very rough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So as the light hits it, the light is reflected in multiple directions, and it's known as a diffuse reflection. Whereas if you go for the other end of the extreme, a gloss surface is very smooth. Therefore, the light is going to react in exactly the same way. That's how you end up with more of what's like a specular highlight, and that makes the color, because the light is coming into your eyes from one angle rather than from multiple angles. You get the full effect of what that color is. So it looks more saturated.
Oh, I like that. I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, so if you want a more saturated colour, tiny little bit of satin in it, or a little bit of gloss varnish just mixed in the paint, will actually punch it up a little bit.
I wondered but now you think about it, like things like Vallejo's game colour range are generally a bit more glossy than matte, and that's probably why. But I think the thing you said is really key, and I think perfect timing for people like Squidmar and Andy to do that video, to start talking about hey, white in your paint is desaturating your things, guys. If you want vibrant things, because for years all I've heard online YouTuber painters talk about is like, oh, you want more contrast, you want dark to light contrast, you want temperature contrast, you want texture contrast, and you want is it value or hue contrast? Really, really push the vibrancy of those colours against dull colours, makes them pop. And vivid red against a deep green, boom, almost blows your eyes with colour. And all these companies now are heading more towards this easy coverage one coat. Yep, great, okay. Like you say, it's good when you get it down. You go, oh, I'm a great painter because I've done this. But it is also limited by that flatness and almost that matteness and that desaturation. Yeah, the colours better, might be easier, but you also, it's not going to win you a golden demon or equivalent at the end of the day, because you've lost so much colour value and saturation in that. So people actually coming out with paints going, well, actually, this is what paint does, and educating people is probably to more people's benefit. And yeah.
And the other thing is usability as well. Is a satin paint is naturally a little bit more resistant than a matte paint. Matte paints are just a little bit more fragile. The satin just gives you a bit more protection. And again, it depends on what your painting style is. Now, I think that 80% of the world should paint layered with and use a wash early on.
Yeah.
So start dark, maybe a zenithal, get your base color and your first layer on, then put a gentle wash over the top. That gives you a nice little bit of dark lining around all the detail, and then you can go in and go to town on however far you want to finish it off. So if you've got a satin paint, the wash actually moves into the recesses a little bit more easily. The paint's a little bit more resistant, so if you mess it up, you can go in and kind of scrub it a little bit. Whereas sometimes with these, and I use ProAcryl, I use Scale 75.
Yeah, same.
You just have to be a little bit more careful with those about how you work the surface, and sometimes if you aren't washing in the right way, you can stain the surface a little bit and then you try and kind of clean it up, and you can get into all sorts of mess. So
no, I've done it myself numerous. Like they're good for coverage, but also unforgiving.
Yeah.
So like you say, everything's got to be a balance, hasn't it? And the amount you do of something, you lose somewhere else, and vice versa. So I think that's it. It's about communicating to people, right, these are the paints for this and why they are for this. And if people knew more about what the paints were for and how to and why to apply them in that way, people may be able to make better choices about what they purchase at the end.
And I think that was something that I was conscious of, and it was quite a pressure, really, because there are dozens and dozens, if not, no, actually, there's hundreds of painters far more talented than I am, way more experienced, way better than I am, and they have this kind of like fondness for P3. And I talk to a lot of painters. I'm lucky to kind of be friends with a few of them, and just talk professionally with a whole bunch more. And we kind of talk about what they're looking for from a paint now, but what they're looking for from a paint is not the same as what a beginner or an intermediate style painter is looking for. So that Squigmar video, they said it improves the coverage. They don't like the lack of saturation, but they recognize that it actually makes the paint easier to use. So they can understand why it's happening. So what an advanced painter wants versus what a newer painter wants is two different things. So one of the pressures with the P3 paint range is I don't want the experienced painters to not get a paint that is the same as what they remember it, but I need to increase the accessibility for people who are new to Warmachine, new to gaming in general, who are looking for a really reliable paint range. And I was chatting with John from Ninjon, and he described it to me as like an aspirational goal, which was you really want to create a paint range that someone can start with, and the paint will never be the limit to their output. So you want a paint that will grow with someone all the way up to however far they want to push their painting. If they want to go Golden Demon Slayer Sword, great. You want a paint that can kind of go with them that full distance. I'm like, thanks, John. Easy to say.
Yes.
That was 6 months ago, and I had a lot more hair back then. But
bless, he's killing it at the moment as well, isn't he? After his Golden Demon was
he's awesome. I love him to bits. His content's so good.
Oh, it really is. Love him.
Speaking of the Squigmar video, though, so I saw that, and it's funny how like serendipity works. Like the timing of, I saw that video, and then I think it was the following week I was at the factory to do a paint testing day. And so that was in my mind's eye. And in the P3 color range, there's a color called Umbral Umber, which is it's quite a cold brown, but it's betwixt and between. It's neither cold dark brown or warm rich brown. It's kind of a bit half and half, and I think it almost falls between two stools. So I was like, okay, there's an opportunity here. So we were tweaking. I said, right, let's get Umbral Umber where we want it to be. So we've got that there. I'm like, can you now do me another one and punch up, and I'm recreating like Rhinox Hide in my head. And I'm kind of like, push the red, push this, push that. And we pushed it and pushed it, and now we've got like this super rich, vibrant, saturated, like red brown. That is it's like Rhinox Hide on steroids. It's unbelievably good.
Brilliant.
I like the sound of that. It's a big colour of mine, Rhinox Hide.
Me too. I love it. Absolutely love it. So when I saw that video, because I was like, oh god, So I'm not quite as bad as like, you know, James at Siege Studios he's a nightmare. It's like he hears that Vallejo are changing the color formulation, so we just go out and buy like 1,000 bottles of like black paint so he never runs out.
Oh, he is. So he's obsessed. When I first met him, this was nearly 10 years ago. He was like, if anyone, like, he sat down and I learned to paint at a Siege Studios painting course, and he almost sat us down and for the first hour kind of indoctrinated us into saying, if anyone finds any Blood Angels Red from the 90s, send it to me, and otherwise no more course. Like,
it's his own Amway.
Yeah. And he's that obsessed with that colour. And then he sent me a photo of, it was a couple of years back, and he's just got this little box. It's an old GW box that's got loads of like half-used Blood Angels Red in them.
Oh, wow.
But it was like, Blood Angels Red's a difficult one, because I tried a version of it. I've got an original part, and recently I went to do a review for a company called War Colours, who did Nostalgia 96 paints.
Right.
And it was like,
I really like their pots. Their pot design was nice, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah. They were. It was very. Yeah, this isn't ripping off 90s Citadel at all, but it is. But yeah, they were really nice pots and good things. And it was like, right, this is everything. It's the feel and it's this. And I compared it to my old bottle, which I've poured into a dropper bottle just to keep it safe. Stupid idea. Dropper bottles dry out, turns out. At least the bottle, all the ones I've got. So I compared it to some Blood Angels Red, and I'm like, yeah, it is just as good, but the coverage isn't modern, and it's kind of like, and as much as there was that nostalgia there, like everyone had the nostalgia. When I got back into the hobby 10 years ago, the paint was still in that early stage of Citadel have changed. I prefer the old colours, and people were angrily after the old colours, but when you actually paint with them, it's like, I know that Mephiston Red isn't Blood Angels Red, but God, Mephiston Red is so much easier to use. And it's like, you can go back to that. So you're right, James. It is a great and a very vibrant red. And if you know what you're doing and you know what you want and you want that rich colour, fine. But it's difficult. So it's good to hear that you're trying to close the gap, but not fully. Right. And just go like, boom, everything's coverage now. We're going to colour match it. Yeah. It you know, we've got that. Things have modernised. We do need to get to that point where we've stepped forward with the range, but also we keep it.
It's also important. It's important from a, you know, and I hate to make it kind of commercial, but it's important from a marketing sense. We need to be able to say, this is why you as a painter should think about this paint range. Yeah, this is the segment that you know, if you want a paint that behaves in this way, have a look at this. Yeah, right. If you want paint that has, you know, the sole focus is coverage and ease of use, there are other paint ranges that do that. Now, what's becomes more complicated is we recognise that modern painters want the coverage, but they want the workability as well. As they get better at painting, they're going to want more workability and sacrifice of coverage. So, you know, it's that kind of, you know, two thin coats. It's great as a spiel. Yeah. But for some painters, you only need one coat, and for other painters, you know, you look at some of the videos, they're like, you know, doing 1,000 coats before they kind of got it where they want. It's, for me, it's always been working out what is the message that we want to say about this, and then making sure that the range punches at its weight for everything, but does a couple of things absolutely brilliantly. So it is a wonderful paint. The metallics that we've got are just astonishingly good.
I've always loved the P3 metallics. Like they are.
So we've knocked them up probably another 15 notches. They're unbelievable.
Nice.
So
how does one go about knocking up a paint 15 notches?
You stand on the shoulder of giants. So we work closely with the factory, and we're like, tell us about, you know, what's been changing in the world of metallics. So historically and back in the day, metallics all used a mica flake. And a mica flake is essentially quite a largish flake, but it's quite reflective. That's where you get that metallic sheen from. Okay, it's not actually bits of metal that you kind of putting down. And essentially, in the paint there will be a dye and a pigment, and that will, as it kind of lays onto the surface, will tint the mica flake that's going onto the surface. So that's the old tech.
Because I'm a big fan of the metal colour range from Vallejo. I use those quite a lot.
Yeah, they're gold standard.
If you put those in, I use them in like a weld dry palette, and if you leave them, they separate out. So they look silver, and you mix it, and you're like, oh, it's actually gold, or oh, it's actually this.
Exactly.
Is that that sort of older technology?
No,
or-
so that's new technology.
Oh,
so that's gonna. They use a mix, I believe, of mica and aluminium flakes.
right.
So aluminium flakes. So aluminium is an actual metal, so you get the reflective property from it.
Yeah.
It's lighter, so you that changes the behaviour of the paint. So
Yeah.
it makes it atomised through an airbrush a little bit more easily, which is where the Vallejo
Yeah.
paints really excel. But again, it's kind of what you gain from the smaller, lighter flake that you get with aluminium, you lose because of the bigger, more reflective mica flakes. So it's finding a kind of a balance. So, for example, Army
Right.
Painter use a proprietary blend of the two. So it's a mix of mica and aluminium.
Yeah.
What we're actually using is pure aluminium flake, but it's dyed aluminium. So the colour is in the actual flake, not in the formula.
Oh, brilliant.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's actually potentially not just cool, that's game changing. Like, so we've talked about the Vallejo metallics, and I love for not so much for blending, I struggle to blend with them, but like the Vallejo.
Can't say I've ever tried.
Oh yeah, no. So if you airbrush, it's fine, but
Yeah.
there's just not that much. There's like 15 or so colours in the range, and they're all the same bloody silver, apart from two of them.
Yeah.
But when you paint with them, so you take the gold or the copper or bronze copper, and then if you lift it up with the paintbrush, and then you apply it to some tissue, all of the medium with the colour in it is sucked out, leaving you with basically
Just silver.
again. So it's kind of almost useless. But Marco Frazzoni, who we talk of often because we love him,
Love Marco.
has found a way of mixing them with Liquitex inks and various inks.
Yep.
And then you get a coloured version, but again, it still suffers with that because
So he's just he's pimping the same method. He's making the
Yeah.
colour around it.
Yes,
that colour. He's not
exactly
actually
that.
dyeing the pigment.
and it
the flake.
slightly, marginally dulls the reflectiveness.
Yes.
But you've actually coloured the flake, which, if I'm right,
Not me, the factory. Who are super smart.
No, he's, and
I
he's-
would love to take
he's
credit
being
for him. but-
modest.
Yeah.
Each individual
He's
flake
sitting there
is
like,
done separately. Yeah.
just
And that's the
painted
level of detail we'll go to.
Yeah.
but based on that, that means you're going to not only be able to. Well, you've delivered what I've wanted for years. One, I would expect a wider variety of colours, not just silvers, but also you're going to keep that reflectivity up whilst still colouring. Oh, I'm excited for
Yeah.
them.
And what's cool about it, and it certainly wouldn't translate into this, but maybe I'll send you some pictures and you can B-roll it or something later.
Yeah.
But because the flake has the colour, I can now dilute it right down. So you put a black glove on, you put a splodge on your back, and you kind of water it down. You can actually see the flakes dancing around. There's quite
You
it's
can,
quite a
yeah.
nice way of put and seeing how paint behaves when you're pushing around with your brush. But you're actually able to take it quite diluted, apply it to a surface, and then you end up with these still retaining the colour, but the flakes are now more disparate, so they settle down. You can do some really wonderful weathering really effortlessly. So you go talking about blending and highlighting
Yeah.
of actual metallics, it's a bit tough.
Yeah.
Because you
Yeah.
can't actually dilute it down.
Yeah.
So when you can dilute it down, but without losing the colour identity, it makes life a lot easier.
Ooh.
Yeah, so I'm pretty excited about
sold.
those.
I'm happy. Yeah.
Yeah.
So one P3 metallics, please.
All right, sold. There you go, customer
good
number
man.
one.
Yeah. How, if you, like, again, if you can sort of say or whatever, how many sort of metals do you think you'll be sort of covering?
So,
It's like
metallics
silver
isn't-
and gold, gunmetal,
Yeah.
copper, brass, maybe, or something like that. Like they're
Yeah.
like the staples generally, I think. Aren't
Typically, I don't think you need bucket loads. So as Marco Frassoni shows, if you want a different colour, you can tint either at the application, or you can just glaze afterwards to kind of change like the colour of it.
Yeah.
Or my preferred method is get the colour variation in the undertones and then put the metallic paint over the top.
Okay.
And then you get the difference in the colour that way.
Yeah.
So I think really you need 3 silver, 3 gold, 3 brass, 3 copper, and you're pretty much covered pretty much everything you really need to.
Yeah.
There will be a couple that will be then it becomes ease of use after that point. So if you want, say, like a decayed metal, like that, wonderful scale 75,
Right, yeah.
you can actually do
Brilliant
that
paint.
by grabbing a little bit of brine oxide
Yeah.
or the equivalent thereof, and just mixing that in with your silver. That kind of gives you that kind. In with your gold, that gives you that kind of knocked down sort of flattened off gold effect, or you can buy a pre-made pot of decayed gold. It becomes a lot more kind of ease of use, quality of lifestyle options at that point in time. Now we do have a colour who, in a stunning display of me being old, I've forgotten their name instantly the minute I think of it, which is like a really dark, rich, it's almost like a Timbits. There's a black equivalent of that. So where Timbits is like a dark, desaturated kind of base for gold and copper, we've done one called Boiler Black, which is a really dark black blue based silver. That if you kind of just dry brush it on over black, it looks like a graphite pencil, which
cool.
is like really nice. Yeah, really good.
Yeah.
First layer, ink wash over the top, edge highlight, job done. So I think there's a long shaggy dog story to answer your question. Around about 12 to 15 metallic paints, I think, is probably the sweet spot.
Yeah.
Are you sorry? And this is why I kept grabbing my phone, because I actually reviewed the P3 paints about 5 or 6 years ago.
Oh, right, okay.
The original range.
Did you like them?
I love them. That's the metallics, really good coverage. I really like the metallics, like for decent coverage. But what I really liked is there was whatever that colour is there. And
that's
you can't
Boiler
see. Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah, that's the
so
one.
that, and I couldn't see that because I was like, the images on my site are so low res that you can't see the names of the colours. And I'm like, okay, I need to.
Yeah, that'd be Boiler Black. Yeah.
And I also need to up-res my images. But yeah, so that, I absolutely loved that as a base for silver. I was like, oh, that goes straight on. And then you just put the silver on top of it, which was whatever that one was, which was still a dark silver. But
Plate steel, maybe. I think.
so are you looking to, because these weren't aluminium back in the day, were they?
No.
These were like a mica. Are you looking to similarly are you looking to emulate those kind of earlier P3 colours, or maybe go in your own way?
Yeah, so I think it's a mix is the answer, and it's situational depending on the paint. So there are some paints where I think there is such a fondness for the colour for good reason.
Yeah.
I don't want to mess with that.
Yeah.
So cold black, I want to get as close as humanly possible to the OG cold black, for example. There are other colours that I think would actually benefit from a little bit more punch. The Umbral Umber is a good example of punching a little bit of red into it, actually gives it a bit of saturation and a bit of life to it. Now, the question will be, can I create enough of a differential between OG Umbral Umber and the new super red kind of Rhinodon hide, let's call it? Need to be decided.
Just randomly,
to warrant two paints, or do we just say, right, well, we like this colour, this now colour is now that colour. That's up for grabs at the moment. So that's literally the stage that we're at, is where we're fine-tuning. But because we're going to take it to crowdfunding, one of the things that we've always done with every crowdfunding project that Steamforged has done is not go to the audience with a fully finished project.
Yeah.
What we've always liked is leaving that last little bit where we're polishing and tweaking, because we can then listen to feedback, we can learn from people what they love, what ideas they have, and we can start folding that in. So, you know, obviously for a board game and an RPG, the ideas are more about the gameplay, and wouldn't it be cool if, you know, whereas with the paint, it's, well, look, we'll discover it, but what I'm hoping to do is get engaged with some conversations with the community, talk to them about what they love about P3, what they hope is going to happen with it. So we've reserved a period of time after the crowdfunding campaign finishes, and I mean a good time, for us to make sure that we're able to listen to the ideas, feedback, and make sure that, you know, we're cementing the right things in place.
So when's that going to go live?
I had a feeling you'd ask me that. I don't know. I wear a white lab coat and kind of mess about with paint all day. When is it? September. Yeah, middle of September.
Thank God.
Yeah, soon.
Yeah.
Really soon. Yeah.
I mean, it may be up, but will be up when it's.
Oh, there you go. All right.
Oh, brilliant.
Well,
Okay,
right
so
now.
we can link to so we can have a link to go and check out the
You can indeed.
That's
Yeah.
brilliant.
Yeah.
Well, keep us in the loop on that, because I hope it'll be interesting to
With,
see how that goes.
Just one more thing, like you said, obviously you're getting community feedback. Are you working with any professional painter? I mean, I'm not asking if you are, don't name names, but if you can't, so you're working with some professional painters, and by professional I mean people who get paid to. So,
we're
because I've
working
got
on-
an eBay store. If does that,
Well, that
no, it
counts.
says pro painted.
Yeah.
So,
I always believe they are,
yeah.
So I'm working closely with two people, both sides of the pond. So someone who has a North American kind of viewpoint and the painting scene there, and someone who's more European based. So they're the people that I get to work with kind of very closely and get feedback from and their thought process. But because painters, we're quite close knit. Everyone knows someone, and everyone knows everyone. So there's an awful lot of kind of wider net casting to make sure that we're talking to the right people to get lots of input on it. So it's been quite important to me to make sure that I don't go solo into a bunker and come out with this amazing thing. It's more that this is built by a village, to kind of make sure that we are recreating that same feel. But also improve the accessibility for new painters, and also create a paint that then will allow you to kind of grow your painting, your painting talent with, and it'll carry you all the way through. Well, it won't carry you. You have to do all the hard work. The paint's just there.
Yeah.
But you know what? I'm glad that it's been rescued.
Good.
Yeah.
It's nice to. I always remember seeing it out there, and like I say, I think I realised I actually also own a flesh colour that I can't remember the name of. But I'm glad to see that you've.
Yeah.
And I think the nice thing as well is, I think for the people that have loved War Machine, I think there's a reassurance to think that it's on its way back, I think, as well, surely.
I think so. And I think one of the things that surprised us, because we did it naturally, when we announced War Machine, one of the things that we were really keen to do was to show painted minis, get minis being played in situ.
Yeah.
And what we just want to do, because that was kind of what you always did, and it's certainly what Games Workshop does most of the time. And if it's good enough for them, then it's certainly something we should look at ourselves. Is it something we should do as well? And painted minis just look awesome. But one of the bits of feedback that we got was people being so excited to see painted minis, because I think with the digital pipeline, it's very easy to fall into the trap. It's quite seductive to just show a render and just show a turntable and just like an ambient lighting on it, and showing an actual mini that's been printed off and painted and in situ. So I think that accidentally was a really smart idea. I mean, I wish I could say, I knew that was going to happen. But we just did it because we thought it was the right thing to do, and it turned out to be a really, really cool idea. And I think it shows how important then that paint range is going to be, because people actually want their minis to be painted, and therefore it's going to be quite a harmonious product to go with like the core war game.
Brilliant.
Yeah, with the one of the memorable things, and I have to say, for all of my faults, which there are many, one of them is having not used P3 paints previously, but I know the pot.
Yes.
And I think of P3. I think of the circle, the logo, I feel like is very memorable, but the pot is particularly. Will that stay, or will they go into dropper bottles?
That's a great question. So this may or may not translate across the Atlantic, but I tend to answer this with a Brexit analogy. Now, I don't particularly care which way people voted on Brexit. What
I bloody do.
Well, I professionally, I don't care. Personally, I care very deeply, and I kind of wish it had gone a different way. But then I think that's true for almost everyone in the UK. Whether you voted yes or no, everyone wishes that it'd gone a different way. And the reason is Brexit was never defined. So when we get a lot of feedback saying dropper bottles, no one actually says, I specifically want the AK 3rd Gen style bottle, or I want the Pro Acryl style bottle, or I want the Too Thin Coat style bottle. So the danger of us going, yes, dropper bottles, woo! Look at those babies. They're going to go, well, that's not the dropper bottle I wanted.
Yeah, you get your subdivisions.
Right. So there's an issue with the dropper bottles. That being said, there are some dropper bottles that I like, but you go back to the other route, and you mentioned it just a second ago. Turns out dropper bottles dry out. The nozzle gets blocked. If you want to put a mixing ball in, the mixing ball gets in the way of the nozzle. You squeeze too hard, the whole thing explodes. The ball goes off, ricochets off the wall. So there's drawbacks to dropper bottles, but there is ease of use. And if you're one of those people, I am not, who are a bit weird and clean their nozzle every time properly and make sure the lids are screwed. I mean, I don't know who does that, but sure, I can understand it.
But they exist.
Yeah. Whereas the original pot, as you were saying, has brand recognition. And if you talk to someone like James, who collects old paints, he will tell you that style of paint pot keeps the paint mint. It's like a time capsule. So you can buy. I've got P3 paints at home that are 10 years old.
Yeah, me too.
Shake them up, take the ripcord off, open it up, and it's the same as the day it was made. So those paint pots are designed to create a vacuum seal, and they keep your paint in absolutely pristine condition. And if you have to just do a little wipe every now and then just to keep it clean, if you've over opened it, well, you know, you have to do that with any type of pot that you've got.
Yeah.
So I think the answer is undecided. Now, what we probably will do at the Kickstarter is maybe offer both.
Oh,
and then we'll see what people like.
Yeah.
What we take to retail is TBD.
Okay.
No.
But I like the OG pots personally.
Well, the thing is,
yeah.
Talk about the OG pots is, you know, we had Tom Hibbard on the show, and he spoke extensively about why Games Workshop stay with what they have instead of a dropper bottle. And one of the things he mentioned is just brand recognition.
Yep.
It's a thing.
Yep.
People know what it is now. It looks, and it's as simple as that.
Yep.
You know?
Anybody's paint that is in a dropper bottle looks very, very similar to any other brand that is in a dropper bottle. Yeah.
And it's slightly weird as well. It's like the size and shape of it. Now, most paints come in like 18 mil. Some of them are a little bit tight and they come in 16 mil, but you know, most of them are around about 18 mil. But if you look at a P3 18 mil pot, it just somehow looks bigger, and I think it's because it's slightly shorter and slightly wider, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it just looks like you're getting more paint. So there's a degree of branding and shelf presence and stuff like that needs to be considered when it comes to it. But my favourite epiphany was when I hit upon the Brexit analogy when it comes to dropper, because it is by far and away the most popular question that we get asked, which is, is it going to be dropper bottles or not? And if you don't do dropper bottles, you're crazy. But then I think if you're that way engaged on dropper bottles, we're all used to just decanting Citadel paints into a dropper bottle.
About 1,000 videos on YouTube showing you how to do it.
I tried it. I tried it once or twice and vowed that I would never do it again.
I did every Citadel paint.
You're an idiot.
I know. I did it with every Citadel paint. It was one of my first ever blog posts. It's what blew up fohammer.com back in the day. And I don't regret it, but I'd never do it again. No. I don't do it with
I don't know if it's worth it or not. The only time I do it is if it's paint that I use a lot of.
Yeah.
So all of my browns, my brown recipe is all in dropper bottles because they're just easy to leave on my desk and they're always there. And sometimes you do just want to add just a tiny little drop.
Yeah.
But most of the times I decant in is if I'm making a custom mix.
Yeah.
So like I did like Duraluminum, half and half with Iron Warriors. Have you heard of that? So if you get the Vallejo metal colour,
Duraluminium.
That one.
Yep.
Half and half with like Iron Warriors. Iron Warriors base from GW.
The darker silver,
you get like the ease of coverage from like the application from the metal colour, but you get like a really rich depth from the
Have you ever thought of mixing a metallic with a metallic?
I have done it. Fairly recently, because I think potentially on some of those things where I wanted. Oh no, it was some Death Guard I painted. I wanted that coppery brass, but because I couldn't find it in the big metal color pots, so I just took like the I don't know, like steel or something, but then mixed the brass into it, and it worked pretty well.
Hey, there you go.
Or if you're going to follow like a Marco recipe, just mix it up
with it,
in a pot, and then you've got it ready to go.
Yeah. Do you think I see? Because my introduction to the world of miniature painting is through Games Workshop. Like my brain works in Citadel paints, and I see another red, and I'm like, well, is that Mephiston red, or is it like that that kind of thing? And I always find like the color charts and stuff quite handy. I feel like I'm moving away from it, but
but you think about it, like, because I've used those color charts, so you get your big box of 2 thin coats and it has a nice color chart, and it just tells you that, guess what, there's a finite number of colors under the under the sun, isn't there? They're all so, and it turns out the War Games minis need certain kind of colors. You need a warm rich brown, you need a desaturated green, you need a vibrant saturated green. We all need the same kind of thing. So it is, I think, most important thing about paint is the behavior in it matching your painting style, and what works for one person wouldn't necessarily work for someone else. weirdly, like the feel of the paint coming off the brush is quite a personal thing as well. It depends on how comfortable you are with how loaded your brush is, and how much you've diluted the paint, and how big your brush strokes are, and are you a horizontal guy or a top down guy or a tip guy. It's like, there's a million different ways of painting a Mini, but the colors are the colors, right? And you could pick any color from any range and probably find something quite similar in other ranges. Except P3 paints, there are about 5 colours you just... No, I'm joking. There are some colours in every range that you just think, that is the tip-top version of that colour. It's not that there's a unique colour, that's just the best version of the colour. So, you take some of the paint range, some of the paints in P3, Cold Black is just the tip-top of that, and GW copied it with it. Is it Drew Shivada?
Yeah.
So it's that kind of colour. I think Pro Acryl actually do a Cold Black as well.
Yes, they do. Yeah.
So having tried them all, my personal take is the P3 one is the granddaddy of them all. So but it doesn't mean that it's the only one of that kind of that type of colour.
Yeah. Wow. Excellent, because that was one of our patrons said, it'd be interesting if they did a colour match chart for the range versus the 5 main producers in the space. Then you'd have to decide who those 5 are.
Yeah.
P3.
Pro Acryl.
So was I go Citadel, Army Painter, Vallejo, AK, and then Monument.
Yeah.
That's
not Green Stuff World, is it?
But
I wouldn't put Green Stuff World in there.
It's Citadel, Army Painter. Who else did we say?
Pro
Acryl, AK, Pro Acryl, sorry.
You got Scale 75 as well.
Yeah, Scale 75, AK, and P3.
Yeah.
They're the top 5.
How many fingers have you got on one hand?
You know what? Too many. My parents were cousins. So.
Sorry, I interrupted your answer.
Did you?
I think so. No, you didn't answer the question.
You did.
Well, no, I said, what did I say? So, he said, be interested if they did a colour match chart for the range versus the 5 main producers.
I was going to say, there's an interesting kind of legality there, which
oh, really?
We probably couldn't show someone else's product and go, it's like this, because it's their IP and it's their copyright. So we can't do that. So I don't think it's something that we could do, but it's certainly something that would imagine
to get a member of your community.
Someone would do it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You can maybe guide them as to what they might want to say.
Well, you couldn't guide them, but I'm sure you could offer help if they asked. But but no, you're right. That's interesting because I believe other rangers do it. I'm sure.
Yeah, I think that's
I'm sure I've seen some official ones of
Duncan.
The colour. Yeah, you can say the name of it. That's
because you can't. I'm assuming you can't copyright a CMYK like hue and go.
No, this is why GW and a lot of places give them funky names that no one else can have. So
because I know Tooth and Coats, they.
Oh, they do.
I'm happy to be wrong.
No, you do.
You get a poster,
don't you? Yeah.
And this is a bit I'm happy to be wrong about, but I get the impression that they have taken the existing GW colours that everybody knows, made their version of improvements to them, and then have gone, Surcoat Silver is this. This red is Mephiston red, and you can directly compare them.
I think they're more similar too.
It's less of a leap.
Where they've really rubbed it in is where they've gone with White Star. Like that, that's brilliant.
I quite like that.
I think what you were saying before, like as I've spent more time in painting and more time watching Marco's videos, I no longer look at, and weirdly I've started doing a lot of colouring in with alcohol markers as well, because I find it as a good exercise for painting and just colour blending, and it's faster. Is I've stopped thinking about things as Mephiston red, White Star, Granite. It's like, I need a deep reddish brown. I need this, and when you the more you look at the color wheel, and the more you kind of think, right, if I add black, white, or grey, it desaturates it. If I add more of this, it increases the vibrancy, and you start forgetting about what those different color names are.
Trying to follow an exact recipe.
Exactly. The more you can be like, because I could paint a Blood Angel with Mephiston red or Bold Pyrrole red or whatever red, sanguine red, or it's a red Space Marine, and then you just tweak it from there. So, you know, sometimes when you get into your blues, like Ultramarines, like that's not blue, that's pale blue. And the more I start thinking like that, the more I feel less beholden to a particular range.
I find those bits of content more useful when the you know, the content creator is talking about the reasons for why they chose a particular color.
Yeah.
So you can like zero in on what the properties that they're trying to get, rather than them just giving you the name of a paint.
Yeah, because anyone can follow how to paint this to varying degrees of success. But what I love about, and Marco's a great example, and Henry from Cult of Paint as well, is another great guy.
Henry's really good at doing it.
James as well from Siege, like when he was teaching me, he was like, I'm using this because, and the more becauses you know, the more you can make your own decisions in painting. And that's what I'm trying to do now.
That's proper real education there, and then that's why I think those channels do really well, is because they're not just kind of popping up with whatever the latest GW release is and they're just hammering content out.
That's it, yeah.
So heading towards the end, we've had a few questions from our patrons. So
cool.
Phil asked about the colour match chart, and it might be questionable legally. So that's a very interesting one. I'm intrigued to know if the companies that do it officially, how they can get away with it.
Yeah. I think there's definitely some paints in the P3 range that will have a direct correlation. But there'll be others that will just be something
stand on their own. And I feel like now, if so Scale 75 Decayed Metal is a paint that everyone goes, oh, if you only have one Scale 75 metallic,
it's that one.
Get Decayed Metal. I feel like, and that's because there isn't really another brand that do it particularly well. Like if someone says, oh, get this ultramarine blue, or this other blue, or that blue, or that blue, because everyone does it. Like I think the more unique paints you have for great uses, I think that's potentially with a new paint range better.
I do think though, from a manufacturer's point of view, that for every one Decayed Metal there'll probably be 100 others that are quirky and unique and cheap, but don't actually kind of catch on, and you end up with just random paints that no one wants.
Yes, very good point.
Sometimes it could just be random though, couldn't it? Like you've got to, like for example,
it's the zeitgeist, isn't it?
It is, like look at slap chop. Slap chop is a silly word, but it hit the right vibe and it's a technique we've all been doing for years.
Forever.
But Rob hit the right audience at the right time with the right name, boom, and it blew up. And I think paints probably follow that to a degree as well.
I feel like Bold Titanium White, you know, there's a few YouTubers that did videos about it. Dirty Down Rust, it kind of made a push, and people were
Pale
like,
Sand.
oh my god, Pale Sand, definitely. So Spence asks, which I feel like we've sort of covered a little bit, but it is he's capitalized. There is a lot of paint brands out there now.
Correct.
What are you planning on doing to make P3 stand out from the others with the relaunch?
So we're probably going to sponsor a load of professional painters to get tattoos done.
Oh, cool.
No, so I think I want to be consistent in the purpose behind the design and the redesign of the brand, and really want to emphasize the heritage of the paint brand from back in the day and where it came from and what it's good at. And if you can explain to someone, you know, this is what this paint does, this is what it's designed to do, this is what it's excellent at, you know, we could highlight the things that it's not so strong at, but that would be crappy marketing, so we're not going to do that. People can work that out for themselves, quite frankly. But we'll talk about, if you like any kind of wet blending style approach, look at P3 paints, see if it works for you, because, you know, it is one of the best that I've used. Like, took Rich to like a painting day at the factory, and he's wet blending, two brush blending for the first time ever, you know. So it's kind of got that ease of use, it's got that coverage, it's got that ability to kind of mix two paints together on the surface of the model, and then the paint just sort of flattens down. So we will highlight the strengths and the reasons why this paint is distinct and different. Now, one of the best things I think about this whole situation is, unlike almost every other paint range in the market except Citadel, this isn't our primary business model. This isn't the thing that upon which our success falls or grows. This is a really important a supplementary part of our business. So what that gives us is that luxury to make sure that we're going for the very best option that we can.
Yeah.
So we can actually take that extra bit of time or that extra bit of investment to make sure. So it's almost like it's as close to a personal hobby project as I can ever get at Steamforged, where can really, really drill in and make sure it behaves exactly how we want it to behave, and it's going to deliver what we say it's going to deliver.
Yeah, brilliant. And somebody said, Tim asks, what is your colour that comes closest to classic Citadel Goblin Green?
To Goblin Green?
Yeah, if there is one.
I reckon it might... So in terms of vibrancy, Necrotite Green, which is super green, but I think... No, Thornwood Green's the dark green, isn't it?
Yeah, it's dark.
Bordic Olive, I reckon, might be the one.
Yeah.
Okay, there we go.
Yeah.
And then Charles coming in with the paint connoisseurs question. What paint from your range tastes the best?
So we work with like sommeliers
Fantastic.
to really help with the flavour notes. Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah, you're swirling them around the pot. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, 2021. Great year for paint.
Oh, God.
It's absolutely non-toxic, and I do lick my brush, and I don't care what people say.
Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing.
We're
How do you spit blend without licking your brush?
Yeah, we're all brush lickers in here, I think. I was going to ask you a question because you talked about like two brush blending, and we talked about brush.
Easy for you. To say.
Yeah, we talked about your
about
aluminium.
that.
I'll stick with that one.
Yeah,
You say
beat
the
me on
word.
that.
So we talked about two brush blending
Yes.
the other week, and so by two brush blending, nailed it.
Yeah.
Is two brush blending where you apply a colour with a brush, then take the second brush as wet, and then feather out the edge?
Yeah. So it's essentially it's the same as feathering. It's the same as juicing. So
These are other names for the same thing.
yeah. So essentially,
right,
well, there's subtly different. So feathering will be you put the paint down, and then feathering is you'll wash that brush out, and then you'll kind of feather the edge out.
Yeah.
Right. Juicing will be you put it down, you then suck the juice out, and then you kind of like feather it out. Two brush blending is you have a clean brush.
Right.
Yeah.
That's damp, and then you kind of put the paint down, swap brushes,
And you feather it
and
out.
typically you hold it in your teeth. So
Yeah.
that's how you kind of like swapping it in and out. So
Yeah.
it's essentially the same technique of you put a layer down and you just thin the edge out.
There you go.
There we go.
I didn't realise there were three nuanced, different approaches to
All about
Yeah.
how you get the clean brush on and where you
Yes.
store
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
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 Pretty much.
Yeah.
Cleaned up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So swish it, suck it, or
Or just
Bulk it.
have a
brush.
clean one. Yeah. So brilliant. All
That's the
right.
easiest
So we
one,
stood
yeah.
me in good stead.
Yeah. Yeah. Wonderful. So I think that concludes our paint chat. That was really
All right.
insightful.
Thank
you.
you.
Cool.
Right,
Thanks
I just
for
have to
having
say
Excited for them.
the best of luck with the launch for
Thank
it.
you.
I'm really
Yeah.
looking forward to it and
Yeah.
quite excited about it.
I'm excited and terrified in equal measure.
Yeah.
Yeah, really good.
I
You've
can
got
imagine.
a sale on
yeah.
the metallics at least. I'm having them.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, I was
yeah.
excited.
Yeah.
You won me over.
I think like the blending is something that I've only really been able to achieve with an airbrush. So like practicing it on a miniature, I'm kind of like, yeah, I think that's like, the next place I'd like to go.
Yeah.
So I feel like, yeah, for like an intermediate sort of paint is
It's definitely
potentially
worth,
like
yeah,
up my
definitely
street.
worth.
Yeah.
So like Ninja will talk about it quite a bit, which is getting those first colours down and blocking in those first shadows with a wet blend is the fastest way to
Yeah.
get your volumes in place. So it's definitely worth
yeah,
having a go at.
yeah, sensational, wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for coming
Thank
on.
you
man.
so much.
Really appreciate
Thanks
it.
for having me.
Yeah, wonderful. Bye everyone.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Bye bye.
Thanks everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.